Hey Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what makes the were watchdogs howl with glee?
I don't know. What does?
Duh, the moon. Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
You didn't have to make all those faces.
It's just the duh really got me.
I had to because it's like, otherwise the audience is like, well, that's pretty obvious, but if I'm self-aware about it.
Ah, yes, of course.
So, folks, thanks for tuning in. I'm your self-aware host, Madelyn.
I'm your who am I host, Emma.
And this is another main episode of Talk This.
Yeah, and our last episode for 2020. Yeah, get out of here, Buster.
Look, I feel like our 2020 episodes have been our strongest year of main quest episodes yet.
I think they have had a bit of like a manic edge to them that really, just overall.
A live wire.
Yeah. Plus, we had time to play more games, I guess, so that helps.
It's true. I really need to go back and take a look, but I really do think that really only once did I miss playing games that I could have played. Maybe twice.
I think it was twice.
I can't remember if there were 2 times that I missed it when I could have played, and then there was a 3rd time that I skipped because everything was on PC only. Because the Valorant week, I couldn't play either of the games.
Yeah, I think I know Zero Escape Week, which I can't remember what the other game was for that. I'm pretty sure you could have played that game. And then I feel like there was one other week recently.
Right, well, I skipped Ghost Runner.
Right. So, yeah, 2 weeks.
Okay, so twice. Sure. Still though,
very good.
I feel impressed by myself. Maybe I'll say this for next week's side quest, I guess, patting myself on the back. But I kept my promise. I did play a game. I played a game this week. I played more of it than I usually do. So, thanks, winter break.
Yeah.
And this week, as you may or may not have picked up from the quote-unquote joke at the top.
The factoid at the top.
The factoid. Werewolves howl at the moon.
In case you
this
didn't
week,
know.
we're going to be talking about Moon, Remix RPG Adventure, and Watch Dogs Legion. Which, once again, fun parallels between the games this week. Fun thematic parallels, I think. In that Moon is also an anti-fascist. No, I'm just kidding. But I feel like you've been doing a good job plucking games from the hat that have unexpected crossovers here in 2020.
Oh yeah, me and my mini web tool random picker. Doing a great job.
Just take the credit. Take the credit. So let's dive in with Moon, which is sort of a weird instance of an old new game.
Yes.
So Moon was first released. I'm just going to call it Moon, even though it's a Moon Remix RPG Adventure. You can add on the subtitle in your head every time we say it if you'd like. But Moon it's actually really not an RPG. It's really more of an adventure game. From Love Delic, which is a Japanese studio made up of former Square devs. It was first released in 1997 for the PlayStation, but it was Japan only. Moon, despite a marketing campaign and even being shown at E3, I believe, and a beginning of a localization getting to the point where one of the leads had played a partially finished version of it, was then never released in the West.
Yeah, I was going to say that there was work done on the localization, but it was likely canceled due to the fact that it had pretty poor sales when it came out.
And I feel like it's during this time where a lot of these kind of mythic Japanese games come from, these mythic RPGs that never get localized, kind of Mother 3 sort of games.
I don't know when Mother 3 came out. Was it in the 90s?
I have no idea. I'm not good into the Mother 3 lore. But it feels like it's among that pantheon of games of like that never came to the West.
Sure, yeah. I mean, and despite that, it's still pretty largely influential, if only through like concept alone.
It's true. It in some ways it feels very Talk This. The way that Moon was able to have influence on developers despite Western devs not really being able to play it. Because there's not even really apparently a good fan translation of it, unlike obviously the very active Mother community.
Yes.
Moon seemed to have several kind of unsuccessful attempts at a fan translation.
Why is that very Talk This? I'm sorry. Because we're hugely influential on developers?
I meant that the fact that the concept became the thing that influenced the game, not really any knowledge of the specifics of the game.
Oh, I get it. Okay, I see.
So I was feeling it felt like a very much like a Talk This mashup ethos of inspiration, where it's like you take the very broad strokes of the game and occasionally one or two very specific elements and make the mashup. Fast forward about 40 minutes and you'll see exactly what I mean. But Moon is best known as being sort of the original anti-RPG.
Yes. And I actually don't think you can... It's called, like, RPG Remix RPG Adventure. But it's perhaps more accurate to call this, like, an adventure game in terms of, like, familiar mechanics, I would say. But by anti-RPG, it's saying that it takes place within an RPG world. But you are sort of is looking at the actions of the hero through, like, the outside perspective, and sort of being like, that's a little weird, isn't it? It's like, I played, like, the first 30 minutes or so, like, the initial setup to it, and it starts by, like, doing, like, this typical RPG stuff, but even then it's a little bit, like, the exposition, like, steadily gets longer and disappears way before you can read everything that's on the screen with, like, all the backstory. And then you get into, like, the hero role, and you're fighting all these monsters and stuff. And then when your character ends up in the world, the first time you see the hero, they'd encountered, like, a rabid dog as their first enemy. But you see the hero just chasing a perfectly normal dog all around town. Rather frantically.
Something I should note is, for listeners who are wondering, Emma has not suddenly become very fluent in Japanese and acquired an original PlayStation and an original copy of Moon Remix RPG Adventure from Japan. There finally was a port to the Switch and a release for the West with an English localization that just came out this summer.
Yes, you did mention at the start that it's an old game, new game situation.
I know, but I realized as you were talking about playing it that I hadn't actually explained that it is now playable.
Yes.
And I just wanted to jump in and say that before anyone was like, wow, Emma can read Japanese so fast that she can tell she wasn't even supposed to be able to finish reading the exposition.
No, I have not learned to read Japanese, nor do I think I ever will.
2021, baby. The year we get menu fluent.
Sure.
Anyway, so yeah, as Emma said, you're kind of playing around the hero with his gigantic sword on his back. Yes. Which I guess is not a Cloud Strife reference.
No, because this came out the exact same year.
Unless they were at Square looking over a little Tetsu's shoulder at his character
designs. I don't like little Tetsu. I really dislike that.
Anyway, so the beginning of the game was I was playing it and Clickbait Boyfriend was watching, and Clickbait Boyfriend obviously doesn't know anything about the history of cult status RPG Moon Remix RPG Adventure. And he was like, oh, this is the new game this week, right? Because it was on Switch, and it was making fun of RPGs.
Yeah.
And it does really kind of feel that way. Like, if you came to this not knowing that it was a port of an old game, it would definitely feel like a kind of a parody that could be made now, although there's definitely some quality of life stuff.
Yeah. I was gonna say, as soon as you get to the main gameplay, I think there starts to be some quality of life things that's like, oh yeah, this is an old game. Especially since, like, there was, like, this whole thing of them, like, also translating and publishing the manual because it's rather helpful to have your, you know, your strategy guide for the games of this era.
Yeah, it's definitely from 1997 because, yes, the game doesn't explain, oh, let me tell you my tale of woe.
Sure.
Part of it is just, I'm an idiot. So,
sure.
Buckle in. So at the start of the game, you play, like, 10 minutes that is this, like, very condensed version of playing through as the hero this RPG campaign of this game called Moon. And you're, like, a kid on the outside playing your RPG. And then after that 10 minutes, where you, like, jump through a couple of his save files to the end of this 20-hour game. 20-hour RPG. 1997 called.
Didn't do any side quests, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway. So then, this kid gets sucked into the game, and this is apparently, like, an early example of this particularly kind of Japanese genre of getting sucked in.
Yes, the isekai.
Thank you.
Or just sucked into a video game genre. That's its own specialized genre that persists to this day.
Exactly.
Unfortunately.
I live that genre sometimes in my daily life. Anyway, so you get sucked into the game, and you have to name your character. Hey, guess what I named my character?
Champ McDude?
Not enough characters. Champ with a heart.
Champ Heart? Good.
Yeah. Which then the characters in the game start referring to me as Champ Spade. Which I thought was fun. They're like, oh, they identify that he's Joker.
Oh, I see.
Like a little Easter egg for me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's Persona 5 in development, even back in 1997.
Exactly. The original Japanese RPG. The hero does look a little... No, hero doesn't look like Akechi at all.
Really doesn't.
Anyway. So you wake up, and you're in this town, and you see the hero, and the hero's off to get experience, yada yada. And eventually you find your Granby.
Your Granby.
Right, heavy quotes. Champ Spade's Granby. Who thinks you look like Champ Spade, despite the fact that you're Champ Heart. And takes you in, and lets you sleep there, and gives you cookies. And you have a stamina bar, which, to be honest, it's part of this kind of day-night cycle bar. Yeah. And if you haven't read the manual, it would not exactly be clear that it was a stamina bar. Yeah. Now, I did talk to the guy, like the tutorial dude in the game, who told me to, like, eat food and stuff. And so I sort of knew that that was something that was going on. But because your stamina bar at first is exactly half a day, so it falls exactly at the day-night stop, I sort of didn't realize. I shouldn't realize. So I dropped dead, like, 30 seconds away from the grandma's house. I didn't know it was the end. And then I was like, it's okay. I slept in the bed. That's how you save. Emma texted me to tell me that's how you save. I slept in the bed. It'll wake me up at the bed. But then it kicked me to the title screen. And I was like, oh no, that first sleep didn't count. That first sleep wasn't a save. So I started a brand new game. And I died again. Mm-hmm. And only then did I realize there was a continue button in the main menu, and both of my saves were there.
Oh dear.
So I was, like, ready to come to the podcast, like, grumpy, of, like, how dare they make me replay the first 20 minutes without explaining, and then I found the save, and I was like, oh no.
Oops.
Anyway, I've since played a couple hours of Moon total altogether. Weird game.
Yeah.
Interesting game. I'm enjoying it so far. But weirdly designed.
Yeah.
Bold choices.
So as is explained to you by like a floating head in a dream the first night, your purpose in this world as an invisible boy wearing another dead boy's clothes is to go about and gather love from people. Which I believe you do by sort of solving problems and puzzles and doing stuff for them.
Yeah,
right?
I got love by, like, I brought someone back their lost ring. I listened to somebody go on a rant about the environment. I started a rainbow machine. A lot of things give you love.
Yes. And love is the main way that you level up, quote unquote, but leveling up is mostly giving you more stamina so that you can last longer before you drop dead. As that is what happens when you don't get enough sleep, in case you are wondering. You do just drop dead as soon as you need the sleep, I assume.
That said, I am already at the point where my character can stay awake after just playing for a couple of hours for a full day and then a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
You apparently also, I don't know if you're at this point yet, but whatever. You apparently also do get us like a second house you can stay at eventually.
Yes. I have my other house. I made the other guy leave.
Which means that you can then get to more places, right? Because you don't have to stay a certain distance from your Granby's house.
Yes, and now I have a flower that can kind of fast travel me places as well.
Yeah, so you get pretty quickly, you don't really need to worry about your stamina too much anymore.
I have not reached that point yet, I'm gonna be honest. Mostly because, in true Madelyn playing this kind of a game fashion, I'm, like, flashing back to Stardew Valley, and my, like, night's, like, racing to get home in time before my character, like, passed out. In true Madelyn fashion, I'm like, how much can I do before I go to sleep?
Sure, there is that problem. I'm not saying it's never, like, it eliminates any concern. It's just, like, you can go more places now. You have more options.
Yes, I do have more options, even if I cannot exercise them responsibly.
Yeah. So Moon also has a day-night cycle and a week cycle, in which all the NPCs have their, both daily and nightly and weekly, routines in which they do different things. So I feel like we've talked about this a few times, and every single time we're like, wow, this early game had its... it's day-night cycle, and all the villagers do their own unique things. And I think maybe, like, games have regressed in that manner. I feel like we talk about a lot of old games that are very much like, and all the characters, do their things and their characters. And now, maybe it's just that we have too many NPCs, They can't do that anymore.
So I think that's part of it. I also think... And the more I was reading some reviews, I mean, obviously some modern reviews of this game, right? Because there aren't really contemporary English reviews of this game, obviously, because it wasn't translated. So most of the reviews that are out there are people talking about the port that was released this year.
Yeah.
Which means, obviously, it comes from the perspective of people, like, looking back on a game that was innovative at the time, but... does it still feel good to play, or yada yada yada. And something I saw pointed out in several of the reviews, which is not something that I've encountered in 2 hours playing the game, but does make me a little bit concerned about my continued play, is that a lot of the quests and the puzzles, right, because it's an adventure game, deal with really getting to know people's schedules and following them around, or finding, like, another way you can get love is there are monster corpses everywhere, because of course the hero goes around killing monsters, and another big way you can get love is by reuniting the souls of the monsters with the monster corpses.
Yeah, of
which
course.
you can do by finding their spirit, and there's like a big catch and kind of like Play-Doh letters that pops up. But those spirits only appear at certain times or in certain ways, and people only do certain things on certain days because they have routines, whatever those are. And I'm concerned moving forward with the game that it's going to grow frustrating rather than fun. Because so far it's been fun in that kind of like checklisty, heck yeah, got another little bit of love kind of way. But I wonder how I will feel in a couple of hours of the game.
Yeah. It certainly is in that old game way, like, not terribly concerned with, like, the player's time, I guess. Which I think is just the way games used to be made. They weren't terribly concerned with that. Whereas now where you have, like, thousands of games competing for players' attention, right? But, I mean, people, at the same time, like, people love that in other games. That's, like, the whole appeal of, like, Majora's Mask, right? Is, like, learning all the villagers' stories within a time limit and, like, figuring out their routines so that you can do things for them. So I feel like that, like, that's a part of, like, classic games, isn't it?
No, definitely. I'm just wondering if we've moved away from that because it's annoying. Not in a regressive way. Just in a people realized, oh, this actually isn't fun. And decided to move away from it for that reason.
I mean, I definitely think that we have grown towards, generally, obviously, like I said, there's thousands of games out there now, so anything you can think of, somebody's done it. But I feel like there's, like, a more just player-centric approach to game design, and especially, like, RPGs and stuff, in terms of, like, the characters are there for your convenience, right? Versus you having to do your playstyle for characters. That's just like a general sense, I think.
That's very true, and I think it also has to do with, obviously, the adventure game style has fallen comparatively out of vogue relative to the 90s.
Indeed.
And you do see this sort of thing still in, like, again, I'm thinking of Stardew Valley, right? Where you have a limited enough amount of characters that it is possible to get to know people's routines, and there's an incentive to get to know people's routines. But at the same time, that feels like a much more modernized, much more respectful of your time kind of version of that. And, like, Animal Crossing sort of
They don't really have routines, though.
I mean, not the exact
I would
same
appreciate it if my villagers had routines, so that when one of them's just somewhere in the museum, like, maybe I could find them.
I know.
Just buried in the depths of the museum somewhere. Yeah.
It does seem to be something that has made its way into this kind of, like, role-playing simulator type of game. You know, as a fixture, or as something you notice when it's not a fixture. But it's definitely, like, I mean, I don't know, just the adventure game genre just isn't, it's kind of eaten up by action-adventure. And, you know, understandably, this kind of thing is not feasible, and maybe we'll talk about this with our new game, but this kind of thing is not feasible when you have the amount of NPCs that you have to populate a game of 2020 size.
Yeah. There are definitely some wacky NPCs in Moon, though. You can talk maybe about your experience, but I'll just spoil one NPC character, because I watched a video that was just sort of ranting about different things in Moon. And there's some guy who, like, runs, like, a bread store or something, and if you follow him home at night after he's gotten, like, drunk at the bar, he'll leave his door unlocked so you can go in after him. And if you go upstairs, you find out that the bread is actually his head, and he's been growing bread from his head, so the bread he sells is actually yesterday's head.
I gave that to my grandma. My grandma gave me money to go buy bread, and I bought it. I brought it to her. She thanked me.
I'm sorry to break it to you.
That explains why he got so mad when I tried to go up into his house while he was working in the bread store.
Yeah, well, if you want to see this for yourself, you have to just follow him at night when he leaves his door unlocked.
Well, I finally have enough stamina that I can follow him at night. Well, sort of. Except now my grandma is sleeping in her own bed. Rude. So I can't sleep in her bed anymore.
Rude.
Pissed about it. It was almost disastrous because I went over there and I was like trying to play with the dog. And I was like, okay, I'm almost out of stamina, better go to bed. And then I go in and my grandma is sick in bed. And I'm like, Gramby, get up. I gotta sleep. And she's like, if you give the dog a bone, he'll do what you say. And guess what? He didn't. Garbage.
That is what dogs do.
Been trying to train him. Hasn't been working.
Uh-huh.
I'm pretty bad at dog training mini games, I've discovered. This is the second game I've played now that I've failed to teach my dog how to sit.
Sounds familiar.
I bet. Wow, that really changes my
sit.
Perspective on the bakery.
Yeah.
Are the croissants like his toes? I bought a croissant, too.
I don't know. That's my one, the one that stuck out to me from the video I watched, so.
And the character design, I mean, it's definitely this sort of unique time when we were, like, moving from 2D to 3D, where people thought it was okay to just do, like, here's a scary 3D thing in my 2D game.
Yeah.
Which, it sort of works for the aesthetic, kind of slightly freaky aesthetic that Moon has going on, but it's also occasionally just frightening.
Apparently there's some family that's supposed to be, like, an American family that's 3D. Which I'm not sure if it's meant to be like a thing or
is that a fat joke?
I don't know.
Mysterious.
I mean, now it sort of works because it's about like differing animation styles, right? But I don't know what it was meant to be in 1997 when it came out.
A mystery.
You'll have to go if you ever meet them, you can tell me if the story makes it clearer.
I will
what that's supposed
back,
to be.
Believe me. So we apparently have Toby Fox to thank for this game ever getting a Western release.
Yeah. So he mentioned, like, on Twitter once that, like, while he's never played Moon, like, the concept for it is one of the things that sort of inspired him when making Undertale. And since then, apparently, he's also just, like, gone and gotten lunch with Kimura, I believe, is the designer. Just in Japan, just hanging out. And that was sort of, I guess, like, encouraging him to bring it over here, I guess.
It's really wholesome.
Yeah.
There's this really lovely interview with Kimura on Vice about the process of bringing Moon to the West for the first time. And it does literally seem to be like he and Toby Fox sort of became friendly acquaintances, like, they'd get lunch when he'd come to Japan. And one of these days, like, Toby asked him why he didn't bring Moon to the West. And he was like, well, there's no way. But then he was like, but then I thought about it. And I was like, why am I giving up? And he basically started localizing it just so Toby could play it.
Yeah.
Which is just so sweet.
Yeah, it's pretty pure.
But, you know, obviously, I mean, it's a testament to how challenging this kind of thing is to do. Because even for this kind of cult status unreleased game, you know, it took 20 years, and he was talking about, like, how they had to find, I mean, surprise, surprise, they had to find the old code.
Yeah.
Right? Which is always a problem with this era of games, right?
In this case, at least, like, their company, like, fell apart and then has come back together a little bit as Onion Games. So at least then it sort of makes sense. There hasn't been just, like, a history of company that they've somehow lost the source code within their own company. It's like they went and did different things for a while. So maybe there wasn't, like, a good storage system.
And I really recommend going to read the article because it's just it's a really sweet perspective. Something about this director and him reminiscing on the experience of, like, looking back at this code that he made early as a designer and seeing how they dealt with the bugs and then seeing how they dealt with it now, and, like, the ways that he felt it was a weak game and the ways he felt like him then would have thought his games now are not good games. And it was an interesting perspective, and it was kind of a nice perspective.
Yeah, he just seems like a nice guy from the interview I read.
And these kinds of re-releases can often sort of at least feel like just blatant cash grabs from the companies. And obviously this is a little bit different because it was never released in the West, so it's a slightly different situation. But still, to sort of hear the passion and the pleasant experience it was to revisit this early career game for this guy, it was nice. It's like a nice game industry story. And don't we all need a little more of that?
Yeah. Well, I don't really have a transition off of that, but we should probably talk about Watch Dogs now.
Speaking of studios that don't have very many nice stories in 2020, Watch Dogs Legion
was sure a game that came out this year.
Like last month. The end of October.
I mean, that's not last month, really, anymore.
It's almost last month. It's only 5 days away from being last month.
Okay.
So Watch Dogs Legion came out at the end of October of this year somehow. It came out this year, so it's an open world action adventure game from Ubisoft's Toronto branch.
The third game in the Watch Dogs series.
I feel like we talked about Watch Dogs some in the very early days of the podcast. I don't know if
we might have talked about Watch Dogs 2 as a new game. I'm not sure, though.
I don't know.
I also played some of it, so might have been during save data. But Watch Dogs Legion is distinct enough from the previous entries that is certainly worth talking about.
Oh, absolutely. I was more just thinking, wow, the podcast is old.
Yeah.
So Watch Dogs Legion is set in future, but, like, not that future, like 10 years future. Dystopian London. So look forward to that, everybody. Where DedSec, which is the hacker group that you in all the Watch Dogs games, right?
Yeah, it's sort of a side thing in the first one, to be honest, and then they sort of rebrand it and bring it more forefront in the second game, and then this one is all about DedSec, basically.
So they're hackers, because it's Watch Dogs. It's a hacker game.
Yes.
And basically what happens is there's a series of bombings in, like, Parliament and throughout London that's actually instigated by a terrorist hacker group called Zero Day. And DedSec kind of finds out about it and tries to stop it at the last minute, but they fail, and then it looks like they did it. So the whole game is about them trying to kind of clear their name, and also to free London from the high-tech surveillance government state. I'm sorry, I didn't mean government state. I meant, like, military government state.
Yeah.
That it's put under after this kind of giant terrorist attack.
Yep. And the big gimmick of Watch Dogs Legion is that you can play as anybody. So every single, well, I'm pretty sure there are probably some enemies that are not recruitable. But basically every single NPC in the city of London is a potential DedSec agent that you can recruit and bring to your cause. And each one of them has, like, special, like, sort of like a class, quote unquote, and but also has their own individual sort of special combination of traits that either give them benefits or drawbacks in the field. Like, one of them, they can just be particularly flatulent, and that might make them more detectable, for instance. So
I really hate that. It would be hard to not pick that character, but I really don't like it.
So you can collect like a whole bunch of these agents and then approach all sort of side quests and story scenarios with the character that you want. And this character, any character can appear in any scene, and it works for that, basically.
And there's some element of characters in the world that have relationships to each other. Like, it is possible to encounter somebody's grandma or somebody's ex-girlfriend or whatever. Yes. And that can have an impact depending on how you've interacted with that person. But I think these two games make an interesting complement to each other this week. Because while Moon obviously is taking this kind of semi-satirical aim at how NPCs are treated in RPGs, Watch Dogs Legion is apparently, trying to take the idea of these kind of like nameless, faceless nobodies that you just drive all over in Grand Theft Auto or whatever other open world game in whatever scenario, and make them much more a part of the story and real people with real lives.
Yeah. I'll give Watch Dogs credit in that I think it's a nice idea for a message, right, of your game, is that, anyone can, stand up and make a difference. And everybody has their own skills and abilities that make them useful and make them able to do, amazing things or whatever. But in practice, it seems like there's just a little something cold about it because it's so systems-based that there's not a lot of room for, like, human warmth in it, I guess.
And it's really hard to imagine how they would have done that, to be clear. Like, the reviews for this game were lukewarm.
Yeah.
So it got some great reviews. But the reviews for this game were, like, good, not great, for the most part. And to be honest, even from just the press leading up, like, just the hype around being able to play as anyone or everyone, I sort of anticipated this, right?
Yeah.
Because it would just be such an undertaking to really create a world where this many NPCs really have individual personalities and individual routines and real relationships, and that, like, it would be impossible.
Yeah. I mean, it's already pretty impressive from a technical side that it really functions at all. That you can have scenes that, make sense and feels like the character is at least expressing some form of personality that fits them, right? With anybody there in these, like, story scenes, or recruitment conversations can happen with anyone and it makes enough sense and works well enough, like, that's already pretty, like, I can't imagine how much work that does. And I wonder, like, I imagine that has some real innovation behind it that maybe will be interesting to see how that expands in the next few years. But, like, as a first entry, it does, like, it's got all that stuff, but it doesn't quite have, like, a soul behind it yet.
It definitely feels designed for a certain kind of player who really enjoys, really enjoys open world games and has a baseline level of competence. Like, what seems to be the fun of this game is getting attached to characters who may not be the best, or getting attached to them for reasons that have very little to do with what's actually in the game or whatever, and kind of creating your own meta-narrative.
Yeah.
But as I read about that, I was thinking, I mean, that's all well and good, but I can't imagine myself being that good. Like, being good enough at this kind of game that I feel comfortable enough running around with, like Farty the pub man.
And I mean, that's all down to the player, right? Like, the game gives you very basic building blocks, and, like, you can craft meta-narratives out of that, right? You can be like, oh, this character does these sorts of things and takes on this role in the organization and whatever. And maybe you can create some sort of interesting meta conflict if one of those characters dies, right? And there's like a hole in your organization. But the game doesn't do that. Like, that's you bringing your imagination to the game, which, like, sure, maybe that's a thing that you can say you could make cool experiences out of. But honestly, that comes down to the type of player playing it and how much energy they're willing to put into the game themselves.
It does feel like something that developers are going to have to learn how to do more and better as the drive, assuming that the drive for bigger and bigger and bigger and more interactive games continues, right?
Yeah, we'll have to see. Not to really talk about it, but Cyberpunk was like the big problem child this year, but even Legion came out pretty buggy.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of AAA games have come out at least slightly buggy this past year. And part of that's just because it's like generation crossing time, right? So they're pushing the consoles hard. But maybe part of that is also that AAA development is not sustainable, and maybe we'll see games scaled down in the future. Maybe. Big maybe, but...
It would be a good thing, but everyone is going to blame the buggy games this year on the pandemic, so it's going to take at least a couple more years before anyone acknowledges that
true.
It's really just too ambitious.
Yeah.
But it does feel like if we're going to continue pushing in that direction, there's only so much you can do. This game already feels like impossibly big. I can't imagine. I can't even imagine how they made this game and managed to only delay it 6 months and release it in a playable state.
Yeah.
And now I think it's fine, right? Like, I haven't heard about it continuing to be long-term buggy.
Yeah.
But assuming that this continues to be, if this is like something that's inspirational and this is something that people want to incorporate into their game, more of this play as anybody kind of NPC recruiting stuff, getting good at encouraging players to craft meta narrative feels like it's going to be almost essential, because there's just no way you can build enough narrative for the amount of characters that would be expected in this kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's almost not enough narrative. Like, I'm thinking like Fire Emblem, right? Which is obviously a totally different type of game, right? But there's almost not enough narrative for all the characters that you can recruit in Fire Emblem and all of the ways they can interact. And that's like a couple dozen characters, right?
Yeah. You can see them, they really struggled with that in Fates, of having enough story for all the characters, right? Like, they found... in Three Houses, it's still like they have like their couple of quirks, but they also have like their couple of backstory elements, right?
Yeah.
That make them feel more fleshed out as you're playing it. Whereas in Fates, it was literally like, this guy's kind of dumb. Oh, Hinata, you were my favorite unit.
Poor dude. But it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see, because open world is obviously the thing, and more interactive open world is obviously the thing. And if somebody can crack the code of how you get the player to, be their own dungeon master or whatever, that's going to be big.
Yeah. You definitely have to provide more building blocks than Legion does.
Yeah.
I'm not, it's an interesting... Watch Dogs has had an interesting, life cycle as games, from the very nihilistic and unpleasant first game to the very, colorful and fun, sort of hip Watch Dogs 2, to this, huge, ambitious, if slightly soulless project. It's definitely been, an interesting series to sort of partly follow, even if I haven't been able to get into them myself as a player.
Yeah. Kudos to I shouldn't say kudos to Ubisoft, right? But kudos to the developers working on this and working on the series, because they're certainly trying to do bold and interesting things with it.
Yeah.
And it's in some ways uniquely hard, I'm sure, to be at a AAA studio trying to do bold and unique things with an existing property.
Yeah.
Right? And to their credit, right, there's at least a lot of performative diversity in Watch Dogs 3. Watch Dogs Legion, rather. Right? Like, it's not diversity. I mean, I read a few articles on this. It's mostly just there as backstory and there as whatever. But it's there, right? And, you know, it better be in a game where you can play as quote-unquote anyone. But good for them. And
I mean, Watch Dogs 2 is a pretty diverse game.
No, totally.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's new to this game. I'm just saying, like, good for them for continuing to take even more steps in that direction.
Yeah.
And good for them for, you know, at least, even if there's some politics stuff that they've kind of, like, dodged around wanting to talk about in regards to Brexit and all that. Like, good for them for being clearly anti-fascist and all sorts of other kind of interesting elements of what you're fighting against in the surveillance state and post-internet dystopia, whatever.
Yeah, it's not exactly nuanced, but at least it feels like... it does feel like it thinks fascism is bad.
Yeah.
Which, you know, is pretty good. That's a good baseline for a video game to clear, you know?
There was one review I read that was like, you know, it'll be cool if this is some teenager's first experience to anti-fascism, right? Like, it's like, you know what? That's right. That is good. Yeah. Even if in the end they also have to be like cartoonishly evil. They can't just be evil because they're fascists, right?
Yeah.
You know. Good for them for not pretending the game is not political.
Yeah.
I guess.
A
light good for them.
Yes. Ubisoft has been, you know, a bit all over the place. So.
Boy.
As a company.
Yeah.
I'm laughing not because I think it's funny, by the way. Just because that's my natural response to despair, I guess.
Yeah. One thing I am interested about this game that I feel like I don't have a good perspective on, having not actually played it, is how viable it actually is to play it in different styles. Right? Because obviously you can kind of take the gunfight approach, you can take the hacking approach, you can try to use stealth depending on who your characters are.
The video I watched said that there's some main missions that feel like there are multiple ways to approach it, whereas side missions feel a little bit more specialized, I guess. But they also mentioned that theoretically you can build any character to be anything eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So like as you keep progressing, it feels less important that these people are individual people, because you can basically, like, it feels like they have the same skill sets. Like, you can build them into the same skill sets by the end. So in that way, some of the, like, you know, individuality of your operatives gets a little bit lost in the process.
One thing that I do think maybe helps with encourage the meta-narrative building is the permadeath option.
Yeah.
That does
sure.
feel like, okay, like, that is something that if I were a dev wanting to build on this, that I would probably take that and move it forward. Of like, yes, if people can die for real, it kind of forces you to craft more of a narrative.
Yeah. Sorry, just remembering my brief time with Watch Dogs 2, I can't imagine playing this game with permadeath on it.
But see, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying I feel like this game, you have to have a certain baseline level of competence to really be able to... And I'm not saying that in terms of, you know, getting frustrated with the gameplay, but I feel like to be able to have that sense of play with this game, that it feels like you need to really experience what it wants to be, you do have to be a little bit more baseline competent with this kind of game than I feel like I am.
Yeah. I mean, ironically, in Watch Dogs 2, part of my problem was trying to craft a meta-narrative of being non-lethal. when the non-lethal gun option is like 6 times slower than a real gun. Which and also does not keep enemies down very long.
Yeah.
So that was the main problem there. So that's also something to consider, is like, what options are you providing the player, and what are the, is one option truly viable to the average player?
I did feel like I read with this one that the non-lethal feels so much like the lethal that, like, what's the point? So I don't know if they've gone too far in the other direction.
Yeah, might have been.
So are you ready to mash up these games? I'm
ready.
So it feels
it's
like the
Moon,
key...
but it's set in a dystopian London.
That could be. I mean, that's the boring Madelyn take, isn't it? You're trying to parody me.
Get it out of the way.
I mean, it feels like a key element of something mashing these two games up would need to be, like, the NPC's star, right? Like, that is the big crossover, and while they obviously approach it from very different genre convention perspectives, that's the big overlap here this week.
For sure.
So it's a game that I'm making in 2040 when all of my NPCs can have super detailed routines and personalities. And there's millions of them.
Sure, it's just an idea. The execution of it doesn't matter.
Well, that to me feels like a cop-out, though, because that's, like, not even a game. That's just, like, go live your life. That's like, go talk to somebody on the street.
Oh, I just meant, feel free to be as ambitious as you like with the idea.
Okay.
Don't feel limited by current tech, is what I was trying to say to you.
Are there any other genres where the NPCs feel like they have an interesting take? I mean, one option for our mashup is just to go in a totally new direction of, like, what other genre would an NPC-centric game be interesting in?
I mean, what other genres are there? We have our open-world action-adventure, and we have our adventure game / RPG. What other genres are... What?
Like FIFA?
Hey, I want my very narrative-heavy sports game, okay?
Yeah.
That's true. I wanted that for a very long time. You could have something like that, like, you're, like, putting together... Okay. Haikyuu.
The game. That's just what I was thinking, too.
No, like, you're some kid on a sports team, but, like, you don't have enough members for, like, the tournament, right? So you're, like, captain. Like, all the older guys have graduated, and it's just, like, you and one other person left. So you need to gather, like, more members in order to be able to play in games. Mm-hmm. And so you're in, like, your school, like, your college or high school or whatever, depending on where you want to set it. And there's all these different students who are potential members of your sports teams. But they all have different, like, routines and stuff that you would have to, like, practice around and all that sort of stuff. And you have to help them out sort of with their own individual stories as well for their character development. And when they get character development, they, like, unlock new skills on the sports team. Come on, this is a really great idea.
Gives you new sports skills. That is very Haikyuu. But what do you think my reaction to that is going to be?
That it's an awesome, dope idea.
For the Persona series.
Why for Persona? They're not on a sports team.
They're in high school. You're, like, recruiting people to... I know it's not sports. It's just Persona, but the bosses are sports.
Sure. I mean, that's great, too. Right?
I know.
I would take a sports game that's Persona-esque.
I would too. Okay, so that's kind of the off-the-wall mashup, right? Because you're right, there's not actually that many other... Like, it wouldn't be very interesting for any kind of, like, a Sims-type game, because it wouldn't be any different.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I'm
like
into
Sims, but you add, like, some fantasy and body horror, I guess.
No. We don't want that. Okay, so that's in our back pocket, because I think that's like a spiritually, a spiritual mashup.
Yeah, it's all about, the power of friendship, too, so you got your love in there, right?
Oh, you're right. You're right. But now we need something a little darker,
Okay.
A little more actual mashup of the two games. Because both these games are a little scarier than that, let's be honest.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah. So you're sucked. It's the movie with Ryan Reynolds that's coming out or is out, where he's an NPC.
Where he is an NPC
in GTA.
Okay.
Basically, you're sucked into the video game world of like a Watch Dogs or GTA or Cyberpunk like, and there's this sort of some player running around causing chaos that you then have to sort of pick up after as things go on.
Yeah. I can't argue that's a mashup. It is.
It is a mashup.
Yeah. I now have started thinking about, what if it's in reverse? What if you play as like an NPC in an RPG or in a... I mean, you could take your pick about whether it's an RPG, NPC... It's too many abreves. Or if it's an open world.
Did you say abreves?
Yeah, I did. NPC. But that NPC is sucked into the real world.
Ooh.
And they have to learn to interact as like a real person.
Sure.
I don't know what the gameplay of that is at all.
That is a very depressing idea.
Right? I think so. I think that there's a serious dark game in there.
Yeah.
You have to learn that it's like, you can't just crash your car into a thing. You can't say the same 3 things to people or they start to think that you're boring and weird.
Yeah.
There's a parody game there, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty good too.
I still think your sports game is the best idea of the bunch, though.
I mean, I don't understand how someone hasn't made something like that yet.
It could be you.
I wish.
We're pitching it, game studios of the world.
You don't have to credit me. I just want to play it. I just want to play, sports anime the game.
It feels like, I don't know, yeah, it does feel like it should be really natural.
Yeah.
Like an obvious fit. Not enough microtransactions, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh well. It is always what I want manager mode of like FIFA to be. And it's just not. Well, folks, if you were a video game NPC, what game would you want to be a character in? What do you think would make the best routine for your life? If you could play as anybody, if you could play your life as anybody, who would you play it as, and why? If you have thoughts on those questions, if you've played Moon, if you've played Watch Dogs Legion, if you have thoughts on anything about this episode, well, you should hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. So follow us there for kind of our end-of-year musings and fun stuff occasionally. And also, you'll never miss an entry on our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, see the games that Emma is about to pick from for our first main episode of 2021, drop us a line in our comment form, and check out the blog, where you can read long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend, which has a new edition out this week, a holiday miracle of Clickbait Boyfriend, with lots of fun Kingdom Hearts music-themed emojis, because he's playing Melody of Memory now. And also Split Screen, where we're watching Coffee Prince and My Hero Academia.
I said there would be 2 this week. There is 1.
There you have it, folks.
I just gotta aim for 2 every week, and I will get 1 out.
The Talk This guarantee. And other blog stuff. I have another blog I'm trying to get out by the end of the year. We'll see if it happens. I should aim for 2, and then one of them will get out, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's
Perfect.
how it works, I think.
Smart. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe so that you never miss an episode on Sundays at noon Eastern. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, anywhere that you can find podcasts. You can find Talk This. It's dangerous to podcast alone. So next week is one of our what we've been playing the last 6 week side quests. Although I propose that we expand it to talk a little bit about our year in gaming as well.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
It's that time of year.
When you mentioned it last time, I was getting something set up or looking at something, so I didn't actually hear what you were posing. But I think that sounds good.
That makes a lot of sense with how you reacted. Now, I was like, that's weird that Emma didn't have like a positive reaction to that. I thought it was an obvious idea.
Yeah, no, it's good.
But now I understand. It's just that you weren't listening to me. But for 2 weeks, Emma, what will we be talking about?
For our old game, we will be talking about Tony Hawk Pro Skater.
Dope. And for our new game, we'll be talking about Tony Hawk Pro Skater.
Exactly. No. We'll be talking about Carrion.
Nice.
And I very much need to replace the games in the hat before next time.
So, folks, if you have game ideas for the hat, Look Like Boyfriend every couple of months is like, these are some great ideas. Like, he says it to me, and I'm like, send it to Emma.
He has not done so yet, so really letting us down.
Seriously. But I look forward for a skaterific episode to kick off 2021.
Yeah.
So,
you want to sign us off?
Yeah, that's it for this week's episode of Talk This. This week, I hope that the hero of your story, if it can't be you, I hope that the hero of your story treats your routine with respect.